Welcome, my darlings, to my humble chateau. Please make yourself very comfortable. Relax your mind and release your imagination to me. I will bring you a story to entrance and entertain. Perhaps a frightening one. Perhaps a steampunk. Perhaps a bit of mythology. Anyway, sit back, enjoy, and subscribe to me. My darlings, from Utah, have always been fascinated by Skinwalker stories. I've collected them in the past. Unfortunately, I've lost the collection I've gotten, the first-hand accounts. I haven't read Skinwalker stories before because so many of them seemed inauthentic. These that I'm bringing to you today are very authentic feeling to me, and I do believe they are quite true. And so, I hope you enjoy. Skinwalker Stories from the Past. True Stories by Elisha Ninja. This is a story my family told me when I was growing up. We lived in a rural community on the Navajo reservation. My aunt and her two brothers were home alone while my grandparents had left for the evening to attend a chapter house meeting. They were in the house, and like many people from the reservation, they didn't have electricity. It was dark outside for about an hour, and my aunt and uncle were getting ready for bed. Outside they heard noises, as if someone moving things around outside. My oldest uncle went to look out the front window and saw a figure by the truck. This was immensely out of order because the closest neighbors were miles away. Whatever it was opened the truck door and began to dig through the personal items that my family had left in the vehicle. My aunt and uncle were frightened by the sight and knew that they should take action. They took out the rifle and all steadied themselves to hold it up. They flung open the door and aimed the gun at the dark figure. The figure turned and started to walk towards them, totally unfazed by the weapon. My uncle pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. The figure drew closer, and my aunt began to smell something like a rotting corpse. It was so strong that it made her gag. My uncle continued to pull the trigger with no luck, and the figure came closer and closer. Off in the distance, headlights were coming up the road. My grandparents were returning. The figure looked towards the light and started to move away, and tucked itself behind a tree near the house. My oldest uncle ran towards the truck with the gun. My grandfather got out of the car, and my uncle pointed to the tree. The thing was poking out its head to observe what they were doing. My grandfather ran into the house and over to the stove. He grabbed a handful of ashes and rubbed over the gun and placed an ash-covered bullet into the chamber. He walked out onto the porch and fired towards the tree. Whatever that thing was, it didn't expect the gun to go off. The gunshot echoed, and the dark figure began running. My grandma chased my aunt inside, and my uncles and grandfather went after it. There weren't many roads or paths, so my grandfather and uncle chased after the figure. The truck was bouncing, and the headlights were not fixed on one particular spot. My uncle swore that even when the headlights would hit the figure, he saw a woman. Not only that, whoever it was running on all fours like a bear. My grandfather eventually stopped the truck as they neared the ditch that drops about 20 feet. He got out and began to yell in Navajo. My uncle says that he was yelling about a local woman. He yelled that he wasn't scared and that he knew it was her and to leave his family alone. A few days passed, and there was news that the woman that my grandfather was yelling about had passed. I've always been told that if you know who the Skinwalker is, say their name and it will kill them. Story 2. My cousin lived in the eastern agency of the Navajo Nation in a community known as Crown Point. She was still living with her parents at the time and was a good girl. She had good grades, a nice ride, and was a very popular girl that played on the basketball team. When she told us this story, it was very out of the ordinary, and the events that followed would also deepen my belief in the traditional Navajo way and of the taboos associated with the Navajo culture. My cousin was coming home from basketball practice, which ran past sunset. It was during the colder months, and so it was dark by the time she pulled into her neighborhood. She pulled into the small housing community that she lived in. It was far from a fenced community, but there were streetlights, and the neighbors weren't too far from one another. As she neared her home, she saw a group of dogs. This wasn't unlikely, as there are random packs of stray dogs that roam rural communities. These dogs don't belong to anyone, and they get their food where they can. As she got closer, she noticed something was off about the dogs. There were 4 dogs, and they were sitting in a circle, all facing each other. This really didn't faze her until she spoke about the event later, because this was a housing community, and my cousin couldn't barrel down the road, so she slowly drove past the group of dogs and kept on going her way. As she continued to drive, she noticed in her peripheral vision that something was running alongside her car. She turned her head to see that a brown dog from the group was trotting alongside her car. She didn't mind much until she hit a strategic placed speed bump. The impact of the bump made her entire car wobble. She looked over at the dog again, still casually keeping pace with the car. She tried to ignore the dog and tried speeding up, keeping in mind where the speed bumps were placed. The dog continued to keep pace. My cousin had to eventually stop at a stop sign. She began to feel immensely uncomfortable and tried to keep her eyes forward, but the curiosity got the best of her. She looked over at the dog. It was facing forward. She continued to stare, and that's when the dog turned its head. Instead of the face of a dog, there was the flat face of a man, covered in hair, and smiling from ear to ear. Fear shot through her body, and my cousin pushed the pedal to the floor, not daring to look back in her rearview mirror. She reached the house and barely pulled herself in the door, weak from fear. My aunt came to her, and my cousin began to sob. She told my aunt everything, and they scheduled a meeting with a medicine man the next day. That night, my cousin was trying to get some rest. She was tossing and turning and felt very ill. She could hear people outside, laughing and talking in Navajo. But she didn't think too much of it because they lived in a community near plenty of neighbors. At the medicine man, he told my cousin that she was very fortunate. The Skinwalker wasn't meant for her. She just happened to spot it while it was out to bring another person misfortune. He also told her that the laughing and talking she had heard in the night was the Skinwalker talking to his friends, letting them know that someone had saw him and that he had scared her. The medicine man told my cousin that if the Skinwalker had been for her, and she had seen him like that, it could have very well killed her. After that encounter, my cousin suffered from many ailments and had to stop playing basketball for a while. She had many ceremonies and eventually got back on her feet. My mother told us a story on the many nights that our electricity went out. When I asked my cousin about it, she confirms it's true, but doesn't like talking about it much. This is part 3. Out on the Navajo reservation, we don't have the city come and collect our trash. So we burn our trash in these huge burning barrels. Not very eco-friendly, I know, but that's what we got. If you don't light the trash properly, the fire will go out and the trash will just sit in the barrel. This is important because we are told to dispose of personal hygiene items correctly. If you remove all your hair from your brush, make sure the trash burned. If it was that time of the month, make sure the trash burned. If you changed a baby's diaper, make sure the trash burned. They tell us these things because skinwalkers have been known to dig through the trash in order to find things that they can use against us. They use the things that we were briefly connected to and bring misfortune on us using these things. Some of my family members take part in the sport of rodeo. So to practice, they have a roping dummy and take turns roping it. My 2 male cousins were enjoying themselves outside, taking turns swinging the rope at the fake calf. The elders are always adamant that we shouldn't stay out past sundown, especially out on the res, where it's pitch black and no one for miles around. But my cousins aren't the superstitious type, and they were under the streetlight. My cousins are joking and laughing, having a great time. That changed when my eldest cousin looks over to the burning barrel. A dark figure is bent over and rummaging through the garbage that failed to burn. My cousins devise a plan that they're going to grab weapons, sticks and rocks, and go chase whatever it is. They move strategically so that they were able to flank the figure. They run full speed at it and begin yelling and swinging their sticks and throwing their rocks. My cousin stated that they kept up with it for the most part. That was until the figure ran under the streetlight. What my cousin thought was a person was actually a goat. Why would they think it was a person? Because the goat was running on its hind legs. They stopped running and fear ran down their backs as the figure ran off into the dark. Feeling nervous and not entirely accepting what they saw, they began roping the dummy again. There was an awkward silence among the boys now. They just saw something unnatural, but talking about it now would just make it seem real. Were they crazy? Did they just see a skinwalker? The boys roped the dummy in silence until one of them looked over to the tree. There was a head peeking out at them. If they didn't pay attention to it, whatever it was would poke its head out from behind the tree and stare. When they would look in the direction of the tree, it would move quickly back out of sight. This was the final straw, and my cousins ran back into the house. They told their parents, and my uncle came out to look. It was still there, poking its head out and going back behind the tree. My uncle loaded his gun and started walking towards the tree. He aimed and pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. The gun jammed. Whatever it was began to run, but it was so fast like a blur, as my cousins described. When it left, my uncle came in and gave the boys a thorough lecture about staying out late. The next day, my cousins told my uncle that whatever it was had been digging through the trash barrel. They went to investigate, and the creature had pulled a lot of things out of the barrel. What was odd was the tracks. Goat prints were all around the area. They followed a set of tracks, and there they found a baby diaper, several feet from the barrel. Whatever they saw that night had very malevolent intentions. My cousin says that although the sight was ungodly, they know what they saw and stand by their claims. The Navajo Reservation is the largest reservation in the U.S. It goes into New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, and Arizona. This story takes place in the northeast region of Arizona, near Indian Wells. It was told by people from around that area. If you're heading west on State Highway 15, out towards Dilkin, you come to a stretch of road that goes into a small valley. I remember going down this road in my youth. If you look at the horizon, it would seem as if the road kept going. Then suddenly your car would be pulled down by gravity as you followed the road. It would always give me butterflies when we'd go down the slope. When I heard the story about this road, it made my stomach feel different. A man was driving home one night, and it was very late. It was a drive that he had done before, so he wasn't too bothered by it. When you're driving on the reservation, sometimes there isn't any way to keep cattle from getting on the road. No fences mean that you need to be extra aware. I was always told to look for the black horse. If you see a black horse, you'll be able to see anything else that may wander into your path of your vehicle. So this man was driving home, not paying much attention. He drives down the slope, but when he gets to the bottom of the valley, he sees it, but doesn't have enough time to react. Suddenly a horse comes out of the darkness. He slams on his brakes, but he is unable to stop and hits the horse with his truck. The impact was not enough to deploy the airbag, but the man was tossed around quite a bit by the incident. He turns on his emergency lights and gets out of the car to assess the damage. The front of the car was crumpled, and one of the headlights was destroyed. He cursed out loud. This was the worst place to have an accident. And he didn't have signal to phone for help. Then he remembered the horse. The man went to the cab of his truck and got a small keychain flashlight. He started shining around looking for the wounded animal. He heard noises, but they didn't sound like a horse. He was positive that what he hit was a horse. As he approached the sound, he could see the animal's fur moving from its ragged breathing. As he got closer, he began to realize what it was. There was a naked, elderly woman wrapped in a large pelt. She was moaning from pain. The man stopped dead in his tracks and got weak from fear. He stumbled back to his truck, and although it suffered plenty of damage, he was able to get it started and drove off. Once he was able to get the signal, he called the authorities. An ambulance drove out there and recovered the woman. She was driven to a local healthcare facility. Due to the fact that many of the healthcare staff were Navajo, no one wanted to touch the woman. The woman was known in the community, and she was thought to be bedridden. This was shocking because she was so far from home, and the state she was in was immensely off-putting. She still had on her attire when she arrived at the hospital. The nurses called her family to come in. When her family got there, They removed her pelt and her jewelry. The staff was very frightened, but there was some non-Navajo staff that was still provided her with care. The elderly woman had only bumps and scrapes. Other than that, she seemed just fine. She was able to get up and walk around that same evening. She went home with her family that night, but after a couple of days, she had passed. In the Navajo culture, if you find out who a skinwalker is, you have the power to destroy them. After the community around Indian Wells found out who, or more fittingly, what this woman was, it was for certain that her time was at an end. So quoth this raven. Well, my darlings, I hope you enjoyed these stories. Like I said before, these truly feel authentic to me. I might bring you some more stories of true stories of skinwalkers if I can find them. I know there are some that I can find in folklore collections around and so forth. Like I say, I'm quite particular about my skinwalker stories, so hopefully Laisha Ninja will share more with us. She's absolutely wonderful. Go visit her stories and give them a point on Reddit, if you will. Please like and share. And if you comment, I will do my best to comment back. If you haven't subscribed, please do so and ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And I will see you next time, my darlings. Sleep well.